If you haven't yet, I want you to go to jobethevans.com and take the college readiness quiz. There's a quiz there for parents and a quiz there for students. When you take that quiz, you get a detailed explanation of where you're at and actionable steps for you to take to move you beyond where you're at right now. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Hello, Elevators. Today I am here with Alison Donaghey, and we are going to be talking about self-esteem, self-worth, and she's going to be sharing a very personal story of a situation where she was raped, which is a really hard subject to talk about. For those of you who are mothers and are listening, it's probably your worst fear of that happening to your daughter. And if you are a young girl listening, that's probably your worst fear too. I know when I was in college, I was coming home from basketball games late at night, like sometimes 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, coming home to an apartment where I lived by myself, and was hands down scared to death that somebody was going to get me, which has always been my fear, with like absolutely no reason behind that, but always had that fear. And Alison today is going to talk about her story and how that came to be. And there's a huge component of worthiness and self-love that plays into that. I think that if there is a way of preventing rape, it's learning and identifying some of the things Alison is going to talk today. So Alison, there's nobody else I'd rather be talking to right now, and I am so glad you're here. So go ahead and tell us. I want you to start your story from the beginning.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. It's always such a treat getting to spend time with you. You are actually one of my favorite humans. So this is like so cool for me. So thank you. I want to actually put a caveat in here first, and just there was a couple of things that you said that I want to address. And most importantly, and I really want people to hear me, is that I'm talking about my story and my experience.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no judgment to how anybody else is dealing with their story and their experience. It's just my story and what worked for me. And I don't ever want anybody to feel like they're being judged, because I have absolutely zero judgment about other people's experiences. That's the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say too is the number of men that are also raped. This is
Mm-hmm.
not just a female problem, it is a rape problem. And so I was blown away when I started doing research as into how many men are also raped. So as women, I think we have to be really careful that we don't try to own that pain for all women when it's actually a human problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's some danger in that. I think that makes us as women feel like we're bigger victims, and keeps us in this state of victimhood, which is a kind of a ugly place to live. And then the other thing too is the stats also show, because you were talking about going home at 2 o'clock in the morning. This is not to encourage people to go running out and party at 2 o'clock in the morning and walk by themselves, but men are actually higher risk of being attacked at early morning hours than women are. And so when we have bus drivers dropping off women closer to their home, that's not an official stop, but they won't do it for men. That's also not fair, because men are more likely to be beat up or attacked physically. So just it's so important that we really start to investigate and see, so that we can maybe go through life just statistically feeling less of a victim. So that's
That is so good. And I will tell you, out of the 3 people that I know that have experienced sexual assault, some kind of sexual violence or whatever, 2 are men out of the
wow,
3. Yeah.
that's crazy. That's
So
high.
yeah.
Like it's, I think it's for every um, 4 women that get raped, 1 man does, but men are less likely to report. So it's shocking. Start having conversations with people in general about it. Yeah.
Yeah. For those of you who have little boys, I feel like with girls, we're always like, my mom always taught me, like, these are your, I can't remember, your private parts. She told me, oh, these are your private parts. Like, and it's okay for me to, touch you here when when we're doing baths, very little. And it's okay for a doctor to touch you there if I'm there, and like being very clear about that. But I wonder if those conversations are happening with boys, which this isn't like a segment on boys or anything, but I think
No.
that's something that's left out a lot, and probably a lot of people here either have a boy or are going to have a son someday potentially. So
Yeah.
just keep that in mind, that even though we do talk about this a lot in relation to girls, it is not just a girl problem. And today that you are sharing your experience,
Hmm.
because your experience is different than everybody's experience, but there's so much that we're going to learn from your story today that is going to help us all, either in the way we parent or the way we handle future situations for ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. All excellent points. So to talk about my story then, um, I was 15 and my parents had divorced when I was 12, and we were the only family that got divorced. And it was really confusing time for me because I thought it made good sense. My parents didn't like each other. There was a lot of fighting in the household. There was a lot of unrest. And so divorce seemed like a perfectly reasonable outcome for me. But I
Mm-hmm.
got really criticized for that. So here I was having this really normal thought process, like probably a very well thought out one, but getting really criticized. And so there was always this weight on me about my ideas weren't good enough, and nothing I was doing was right. And I was the little one in the family. And so there were so many things that really robbed me of my self-worth. So when my mom remarried and we moved across Canada to the West Coast and I started going to school there, I was so insecure. I felt like I had no friends. And it's true, I didn't. The boys just wanted to stare at my boobs, and the girls didn't want to be friends with me because the boys were staring at my boobs. And so there was this really horrible space that I was living in.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day this girl came up to me and she's like, "Oh, hey, we haven't really talked, but do you want to come to my youth group on Friday night?" And in my head, I'm thinking, no, I don't want to go to a youth group. Like, I went to church. It wasn't my bag. I didn't like it. But yes, please, thank you. I would love to
Mm-hmm.
come, was what I actually came out of my mouth because I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere.
Right.
And so then we went to this youth group. It was on a Friday. And we walked through the doors, and there was this guy, and he was so cute, and he had all of this female attention. And I was just like, oh, to be one of those girls, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then he looked up and he saw me and he was like, oh, and he walked away from all these other girls and came over and talked to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I was like, oh, damn, maybe this is where I belong. And I soon realized I didn't really like him. I thought he was a bit of a doofus and he wasn't very smart. and but he asked me out, and I was like, oh my God, he wants to go out with me, not all of those other pretty girls over there. He wants to go out with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I agreed to go out with him. And he picked me up at my house. And he had just moved out on his own. So there was a 2-3 year difference in our ages. And he picked me up, and I didn't want to get in his car. And I got in his car. And then he said to me, he said, well, can we go back to my place? Because I just got off work and I just really wanted to go have a shower and freshen up before we go out, because we were supposed to go out for dinner and a movie. Really creative date. And so I didn't want to go to his house. And I said, sure, no problem, because I didn't want anybody to think poorly of me. I didn't want him to go back to this youth group and tell everybody there that I was a loser and have them laugh at me. Like, I had enough people in my life laughing at me and saying nasty things. And so he came out of the shower with his clothes off and he was like, yeah, we're going to have sex. And I didn't want to. And I said, like, no, I don't want to. I even had my period at the time. And I remember him pulling out my tampon so that he could rape me. And um, I believe at the time I was expressing my lack of interest and my desire to leave. And yet there was still a part of me that was holding back on that because I didn't want anybody to think poorly of me.
Mm-hmm.
And so finally it ended. And then he wanted to sit around and watch TV. And I was able to phone a friend, and she came and picked me up, and I didn't tell her and I didn't tell anybody. And I never went back to that youth group, which is the irony in all of this. I went through all of that to be accepted somewhere and then never wanted to go back. And so it was a really horrible time, and it probably messed up my life for at least 15 years in so many ways.
Mm. That like hits my heart so hard when you tell that, because like it's such a violation. And when that happens, it takes so much away from you, and I think that at that point then you're the one who has to deal with it. Okay,
Yeah.
so regardless of whose fault it is, like it really doesn't matter whose fault it is because you're the one that's going to have to carry it. Should that person face consequences? Yes. Like if this happens to any girls that are listening, or this happens to one of our daughters, like, should they tell and this, get this person in trouble? Yes. But like, in the end, when all that's said and done, you still are carrying it. You carried it for 15 years.
Yeah.
15 years you carried this. So tell us what you carrying this looked like.
Well, I had horrible relationships with men because, of course, I didn't trust them. I had a terrible relationship with myself because I didn't trust myself. I ended up living with a guy who, a week before I moved in with him, he relapsed into IV drug addiction. And the next 6 years of my life was dealing with his pawning everything that we owned. And eventually he did die. And I had a young son by that time, by the time I met him. It affected the jobs I was applying for. It affected the way I saw money. It was the way I saw my friendships. It was the way everything, it was just so permeated. It was my relationship with my parents, because if only they had been different, maybe I would have been different and maybe it wouldn't have happened. I was angry with my dad for dying right around that same time, because maybe if I could have gone and lived with him, this would never have happened. And so there was so much blame and finger pointing that I was going through. And my relationship with sex, like, I didn't enjoy sex at all. I had a lot of it, but I wasn't enjoying it. For me, it was just a manipulation, almost like a getting even kind of thing.
Oh, getting
And
even for you or getting even for the man?
it was me getting even to men.
Mm.
Like, I'll show you, right? I
I'm
don't
gonna
know
be,
how
yeah,
that made sense in my head. I'll show you
yeah.
by making sure you had an orgasm. Like,
Hmm.
it doesn't make a lot of sense. And a lot of times when we carry this pain, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And to try to sort of put logic into feeling is really, sometimes it's just a fruitless attempt. Mhm.
Right. Um, yeah, I'm just thinking about how this manifested in your relationships, but like the same things, the same issues that you were having of unworthiness that happened, that was going on before
Mhm.
before the rape happened. The rape didn't necessarily change it, would you say, but maybe amplified it?
It definitely amplified it. Yeah. It was just one more nail in the coffin of my
Mm-hmm.
self-worth.
Yeah.
It was just one more reason for me to believe I wasn't worth anything more than to be discarded from this with this man, like
Right.
to be just be um available for whatever he wanted. Like it was just all more of the same crap that was landing in my lap, telling me I just wasn't good enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously you're like looking back on this at some point, and you're like, okay, so I felt unworthy, unloved in the first place. Then I got raped. Okay. Then I felt unworthy, unlovable. And then I get in a relationship with a drug addict. So at what point are you like, what point is there a turn? And for those listening that maybe have gone through something similar, or have a friend, like, what's the turnaround? What happens inside you that makes you say, hey, like 15 years was long enough, or a month or 2 years or whatever it is, it's long enough. I'm ready to move past this. What does that look like on the inside?
I think for me, it was just time. And I think that is the case for a lot of us. We can hear the same material over and over again, and then one day it sticks. We can hear our mother telling us to fold our clothes, and we don't fold our clothes. And then one day somebody else says, oh, folding our clothes is fun, and it sticks.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's so hard to know what that actual turning point was. Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's really obvious. Like when I quit smoking, my son was like, Mom, I don't want you to die. I
Mm.
remember him very clearly saying that to me, and I quit smoking.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it can be very definitive. I think this was a bit more of a slower realization that it wasn't until I understood how I co-created the situation without shame or blame, but I co-created that. If I had made a different decision any single step of the way, I would not have ended up in his place. Right from the moment when I met him, I would have gone to the church group if I had an ounce of self-respect at the time. I
Mm.
definitely wouldn't have continued talking to a guy that I thought was an idiot, like,
Right.
let alone go out with him or any of those things, which is not to say what he did was okay.
Right.
What it is, though, is me getting to that place where I could understand the construction of the circumstances and know that this didn't happen to me necessarily. It happened as a result of the choices that I was making.
Right.
Again, I didn't deserve it.
Mhm.
He had no right doing what he did. It's not about blaming the victim at all. It is removing that emotion from it and looking strictly at the construction. This happened, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened. If we took away this one little piece, the rest of it would not have happened.
Mhm. Right.
And so understanding how I co-created it was the very first moment I stopped being his victim.
Right. Which brings us to the my part movement.
Mhm.
Which I think in my head all the time about every situation now that's like I see as negative. I'm like, okay, what's my part in this? If there's, something that's not exactly the best in my life, I'm like, okay, what part did I take in this? So how did my part come to be out of your circumstance?
I gave a speech a couple of years ago talking about the Me Too movement and how we
Mhm.
have to be very careful about um, understanding the entire movement. It's not just about taking the little bits and pieces that we like, but looking at the entire movement, considering the whole perspective, because every single thing has a double edge to it. So it's
Mhm.
a double-edged sword. There's a really good part and a really damaging part. And when we can start considering both sides, then we can understand how we are contributing to whichever side we happen to be landing in.
Mhm.
And I talked about my rape during the speech, and then people reached out to me afterwards, and they're like, "How do I start getting to that place? How do
Right.
I start understanding what my part in something is?" Because every single situation we find ourselves in is a dance, right? Like you and me having this conversation right now, it is a dance. We are both co-creating the reality of this show right now. And so therefore we both have a responsibility to what we're bringing to it. And we can't just say, "Oh, look at, we're having this great little dance here
Mhm.
too." It happens in every situation. So it happened with me and this guy. We had a dance and we both contributed to that dance
Right.
occurring. So when we can start to understand how we co-create something, we are actually honoring ourselves. We're honoring that part of ourself that maybe made a choice that wasn't good enough, or not good enough, but wasn't serving our higher good.
Mm. Yeah. So I'm relating everything back to college. And
Uh-huh.
here's what I'm thinking about. I think, and you and I have talked about this before, but I don't feel like women should dress in fear of being raped. Okay. I'm not going to go any further with that. I don't think that women need to do that. Um, with that being said, there are situations that we as women or men put ourselves in that are dangerous. Okay. Walking down, um, you know, here close to here, it's Dixon Street. So a bunch of bars and restaurants. Walking down an alley near Dixon Street at night by yourself when you're intoxicated, bad idea. You are putting yourself in danger. If you are a female, speaking from the female perspective, if you are a female and you go to a frat party and you go into one of the bedrooms to lay down for a little bit because you're not feeling good, or you go to the bathroom by yourself, like, recognize that that might not be the smartest thing to do. The other thing is that we hear on the news all the time about these college parties where a female gets raped. We hear about it too often. But was she intoxicated? Was she intoxicated? Most of the time, it was a party. Everybody was intoxicated. And I tell girls, women, men, anybody who will listen to me, that when you take your drinking or drug use or anything to the point of being impaired, where you don't know what's going on and you don't know the decisions you are making, you are putting yourself at huge risk. And
Mhm.
it's not to say that if you get raped, it's not your fault, or that it is your fault, because, like, once again, it's nobody's permission to take that from you under any circumstance.
Yeah.
But if you get belligerent drunk and can't see straight, don't know what you're doing, nothing, and somebody rapes you, like, that is something that very easily could have been prevented.
Yeah. We're held responsible for the decision to drink and drive, but we're not
Exactly.
held responsible for the decision to drink, spend all evening grinding up against people on the dance floor, and then leaving a party with a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the reason this is so dangerous is because it doesn't take that much alcohol to actually impair your long-term consequence, like that thinking of long-term consequences.
Oh
There's
yeah.
a Malcolm, yeah, it's way less. Like it's actually starts to happen before you feel drunk.
Mm.
And so that's why when you wake up in the morning, you're like, I can't believe I did that. That was like early in the drinking. That wasn't when you were falling down, passed out,
Right. That's the
blind
part you
drunk.
remember.
Yeah. And so, and it also picks and chooses bits and pieces of what you remember. There is no accounting for what we forget. Malcolm Gladwell has an amazing book, and I recommend it as a read to everybody. It's called Talking to Strangers. And he talks about this. And even knowing the alcohol there, the factor, when people are asked for solutions, they're saying, well, men need to be educated about rape. But that's not the problem. The problem is the alcohol. The stats show the problem is the alcohol, and yet nobody ever says, let's stop drinking.
Right.
Right. And there is a difference when we are dressing to get attention from somebody else. We are getting our worth externally. I'm going to put on this cute little outfit that's showing cleavage and part of my bum so that boys will look at me, and then I will feel attractive and I will feel good. That's getting our worth externally. Now, if I am wearing that same outfit and I'm just wearing it because I rock it and I like it and I really don't care if anybody's talking to me or not, that energy will show up very different in a club,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's why you can see really attractive women dressed provocatively and not being harassed, because their energy is not about getting the attention. They are intrinsically valuing themselves, and that energy comes across. So anybody who's a little bit of a predator or also feeling insecure about themselves is not going to go and talk to her.
Right.
And yet we see somebody else who is being mauled by all of these people on the dance floor. And there's a really good chance that their worth is tied to this external attention.
Yeah. That's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you've talked about at the beginning. You talked about you were you're like, I don't want to go out with this guy, but you went out with him. And you're like, I shouldn't get in the car, but you got in the car. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
come on in, I'm gonna go take a shower. And you're like, I shouldn't go in the house. Like you had all these gut instincts. And as a college instructor, I hear stories all the time about girls who were like, I was almost this or I was almost that because but I knew something was up. Like I could tell that something was not
Yeah.
right. And for those of you listening, like listen to that,
Mm-hmm.
listen to
Yeah.
it, because like what if you're wrong? Like what if it's like don't get in the car and you don't get in the car? What's the worst that could happen? Like,
Yeah.
like your worst case scenario for not going out with this guy happened anyways.
Yeah.
So I mean, like,
And it was happening before. So I didn't
right.
actually change anything about my life. I didn't improve it. I didn't make it anything better.
Right. You made you were
Worse.
involved in a situation where it became worse and
Yeah.
escalated. But, listen to your gut and um be responsible for your part in everything. Like right now at the recording of this, we are all quarantined, and like I think all the time I'm doing my part, like hashtag my part, like I'm doing my part because just this is once another situation where we're not at risk of getting raped, but we're at risk of getting harmed in some way by this virus.
Yeah.
So I think that as humans, we can look at everything in the world as, okay, what's my part in this? Things not going well with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your child, your daughter who's going to college. Like, I feel like in our relationships, a lot of times we want to point the finger and be like, oh, it's you that's the problem, or this bad situation happened to me because of you or because of him. But if we can all, it feels so good to step back and be like, um, okay, me and my son aren't getting along. Okay, I can't do anything about him technically. Like I can't change anything about him. I can try, but I can't. Like that will be his decision. But I can say, "Oh, did I do something to escalate this situation? Did I do something to trigger him? Did I do something to make this worse than what it really had to be?" So I think my part, even though you're relating it only to, you know, victimization, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
and getting abused or all that, like it's something that
Well,
we
I
can
relate it
apply
to
to everything.
everything. I
Yeah.
relate it to all of the things. We're happened to be talking about a rape situation here,
Mhm.
and it's really difficult sometimes for people to hear what's my part in that, but it applies to all of the things, all of the things. And because it is tied to our worth, we cannot escape it, right? So if you were trying to change your son, now you're trying to get your worth from your son
Mhm.
so that you can feel like a better parent or whatever your idea of a better parent is.
Right.
And then you are taking his worth away because you were saying you're not good enough.
Mhm.
And I'm just using you and your son as an example. We do this all the time. I do this with my son. It's every time we say to somebody else, can you stop doing that? I don't like it.
Mhm.
We are actually taking their worth away by telling them how they show up and how they can behave.
Right.
You don't like my idea, so you need to start to agree with me so that we can be friends. I'm taking your worth away. I'm saying your life
Right.
experience is good enough to allow you to have an opinion that's different than mine.
Mhm.
And so our worth is tied to all of it. And as soon as we can start looking at what our part in something is, that helps us see where our worth is coming from, if it's coming from a really healthy place or an unhealthy place.
Right. And I think that if there's one like actionable item that each of you can take away from this is before stepping into any situation, recognizing what is in your control and
Hmm.
what your part is in the situation before it happens,
Yeah.
so that you're not looking back on this like Allison did and be like, okay, like I have to take ownership of this after I've like, spent 15 years living in the victim
Yeah.
state.
Don't be
Like,
like Allison.
don't be like Allison.
Don't
Don't
be
be
like
like old
Allison.
Allison. No. But,
Sure,
oh my
it's
gosh,
true. Don't.
I can't even like get into it, but like just a little bit. I believe that like everything that's bad that happens to us has a ripple effect of something really fantastic later. And so, the good thing about you, Allison, is that you have went through this, so others will not have to. That
Yeah,
is what I think.
ideally.
Is
Hmm.
so you tell your story, you inform the rest of us who have yet to have to go through something like that. To teach us our part, to teach us what we can do, the way we can think, how we can find our worthiness, so that maybe we won't be in that situation. So you kind of took the blunt
I
from
took
the
one for
rest
the
of us.
team.
Took one for the team. Okay, so we're wrapping up. Allison, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
Two things, I guess. One, I just want people who are listening to know that they're a miracle. And that makes you inherently worthy. When we see a newborn baby, we don't go, ugh, not miraculous at all. We go, whoa, what a miracle. Like
Right,
two people had sex and this came from it. Like it's incredible, right?
right.
And so that baby is born totally, inherently, and justifiably worthy. And then the world tells this baby it's not good enough. And you are that child. You're completely worthy. This is not about finding something in you that doesn't exist. It already exists. You have value, you have worth. And the second thing is, if you want to go to my website, dominothinking.com, I have a free download there. It's called Brave,
Mhm.
and it will help you start implementing some of this breathing space into the situations you find yourself in so that you can actually make choices that are more aligned with who you want to be and how you want to go through life.
Absolutely. And I'll link to those in the show notes.
Cool.
So, Allison, thank you for being here today. Your message is incredible. And I just thank you. And if you have any questions for Allison, please reach out to her through her website or Facebook. Thanks,
Yeah.
Allison.
Thank you so much. And thanks for all you're doing in the world, too. It's really important what you're doing here.
Thank you. Hey, JoBeth here. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and no matter where you're at in your journey, I hope that you found the tips and tricks and information to be super helpful. If you haven't yet, I want you to go to jobethevans.com and take the college readiness quiz. There's a quiz there for parents and a quiz there for students. When you take that quiz, you get a detailed explanation of where you're at and actionable steps for you to take to move you beyond where you're at right now. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you soon.